and you wanted to talk a little bit about, where the direction of the fire service is going.
Yeah, well, like I alluded to earlier, I believe that a lot of the fire service is driven on two levels. We have our organizations, the International Association of Firefighters, chiefs, all these different organizations, and they do have a very big impact on the fire service. The rank and file firefighter does not have that type of gravitas or reach necessarily, but there is a grassroots campaign in the fire service for departments, companies, individuals to be good at their job and to focus on firefighting.
Thoughts and opinions by JobTlks podcast members and guests are not representative of any department, organization, or city.
This episode is brought to you by Fortified Leather. Fortified Leather is owned by Nathan Welch, a firefighter out in Selma, California. I've had the opportunity over the last few weeks to get to know Nathan and learn a lot about his business, and I couldn't be happier to have him as a sponsor of the show. Fortified Leather comes from humble family beginnings when Nathan found some leather working tools left over from an old relative. He was in need of a shield at the time and decided to try his hand at leatherwork, and we're certainly glad he did. Since then, Fortified Leather has grown from making that first shield to a solid business shipping quality leather-made goods all over the country. Fortified Leather makes leather suspenders, bunker belts, custom radio harnesses, glove holsters, flashlight holders, and a whole lot more. They're high quality and able to be customized, so if you're in the market, head over to fortifiedleather.com and check out our friend Nathan. Make sure to tell him that JobTlks sent you over. Don't forget to find him on all the social media channels, give him a follow and a shout out, and let's keep supporting our firefighter and family-owned businesses. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JobTlks. We have somebody who you probably already can see needs no introduction here. The one and only Ray McCormack from FDNY. Ray, man, how's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I know we've been trying to set this up for a little while, and I'm glad it finally came to fruition. I just got back from the FDIC board meeting. One of the board members who helps to curate the show in a little bit of a way, we get. I'm not the only one. There's quite a list of people that are pretty well known in the fire service and some up and comers as well. And basically what happens is at some point during the summer, July, your summer is ruined for about 2.5 weeks where you have to spend a certain amount of your day going over proposals. And,
Right.
Each person gets a select number of categories. And we do a grading system on the submissions. And it's very important. And it's also gives us a good opportunity to see what people's interests are. And, there's tremendous amount of interest in leadership. I would say that's like probably that could be the number one topic for submissions because there are so many varying shades of leadership. Some people look at the company officer for leadership, the chief officer, or firefighters even. So you have that range. Then you have the range of how someone goes about it, whether it's mentoring they're focusing on, whether it's keeping the leader in check. There's so many variations. And then what ultimately does happen, even though there are so many gradients to this, that there will be opportunity for us to choose. And sometimes that is very difficult because you can have some really dynamic programs and you can have more than one, obviously. So choosing can be difficult. Another thing, a buddy of mine told me a story. A mutual friend of ours had put in for FDIC and not gotten a positive nod. And he does speak around the country and he's pretty well known. But as I explained, they get so many submissions that you could score a perfect score with the rating system, but there's going to be a couple hundred people who get the same thing. So it comes down to some other criteria as well. So the final judgment is not mine. That's a headache. They're working on that right now this week. That's a multi-day process, and David Rhodes is the new editor of Fire Engineering Magazine, and he's going to take charge of that and be the final arbiter of all of that. And That's good, because the show should be curated ultimately by the people who run the magazine and do the educational component of the show. It's
Right.
very important. The vendors are important. Another aspect of the FDIC show is the vendor. The vendor are very important. We wouldn't have the educational component if we didn't have the vendors, which is
Right.
I love it. I try and encourage people to go to the show if they can at some point, because we get to see our whole industry in one location, from
Right.
hose clamps all the way to tremendously large fire trucks and all manner in between. And it's just great to see it all. It's something to take in at least once in your career. So that's what I was doing this past week, and
That's awesome.
it's a great opportunity, and I'm happy to do it, and I've been honored with the ability to do it. And when people care about something like the magazine, or a lot of places have board of directors and things like that. That's important, because you get that variant of opinion, and if it's just a yes factory, you're not going to improve. You need a certain amount of friction in any
Nobody
committee.
needs to be in an echo chamber. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I will say one of my first introductions to you, and I'll say real quick, and then we'll do your bio, but was your speech from 2009. That was actually before I was even in the fire service. I joined in 2011, but that speech really fired me up, and so the FDIC, I haven't had a chance to make it up there. I know Johnny went to this last one, but hopefully we'll be going to this one coming up this year. Pretty excited about it.
That was impressive. That entire, and I got to say, with Chief Rhodes at the helm, man, I got to say
that speech was.
I got the utmost
great
confidence.
too.
Yeah, I got the utmost confidence that he's going to make good decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
I always say, when I'm like watching like UFC fights, or I always say, man, I'm glad I don't have to be the judges for these fights, because
right,
man.
Well, David will do a great job. He's already shown his leadership skills in other areas. He's heavily involved with the smoke diver program, and he ran logistics at FDIC for probably 20 years or so. And he said basically this was the first time he'd been to the opening ceremony in 20 years, because the day after hot ends is when all the tools are coming back and everything has to be inventoried. So he was always very busy during that period of time. But he's made a great transition, and I know that the ship is going to be steered in the right direction with him at the helm. And like you say, my speech, I got that opportunity. So I'll give you a little history. I first taught at FDIC, I believe, in the year 2000. And in 2008, I was in the green room with Bobby Halton, and we were watching one of the presenters. I was sitting on a couch next to him, and he said, "How would you like to do that?" And I said, "Do what?" And he said, "Go up there and speak." And I was like, "Really?" And he says, "Yeah." I said, "Oh, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I'd love to do that. That'd be great." So my chance finally came at the end of the day, and it was a bit nerve-wracking to be in the back. I was in the back for like 4 hours, and so I finally got my chance to come out, and after that, history was made, so to speak. I've heard from a lot of firefighters that use that video to this day for probie class orientation, or they just watch it themselves, and it's quite humbling to hear that. I went, of course, into that speech with the best of intentions. Obviously, some people didn't like it, but I think it's pretty much had its validation in the years since, because if we look at what a lot of firefighters, there's a lot of firefighters doing right now, is hose and nozzle evaluations. People are learning how to do different types of hose stretches and practicing and really being good. And we have a very robust culture of extinguishment in the U.S. Fire Service, very robust. And it's getting better every day, between the knowledge that we've gained through research and the knowledge we've gained through practitioners. The rank and file. I think the rank and file are moving this needle, not, all due respect to the chief officers, but this is really a homegrown thing that I see. At least that's the way I see it.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool too. It's pretty cool for us, like in this platform, to kind of be a part of that, and like get to share, like get to talk to these people that are we're just sharing the stories. You know what I mean? Like we're talking to the people that are really doing the work, and it's pretty humbling on our end to be able to do that. So Ray, real quick, I just want to give everybody, like I said before, if they are watching this show, they already know who you are, but you did 39 years at FDNY, bachelor's from the New York Institute of Technology. You were the lead author of FDNY's Engine Company Operations Manual, developed and taught Back to Basics, Standpipe for all FDNY, co-founder and editor of Urban Firefighter magazine, and then for anybody that's looking to listen to the speech we were just referencing, it is The Culture of Extinguishment. It's on the YouTube, I think on FDIC's page. And you sit on the board for fire engineering. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish.
I don't know. There's so much. You've done multiple UL studies. You lecture on engine and ladder company operations. So you actually started out as a truckie. Is that right?
That's correct. 13 years prior to promotion, I was in Ladder Company 24, which is about 2.5 blocks from the Empire State Building. We were first due there. And also Madison Square Garden, right down the block from there.
And a lot of people might not know this because it wasn't widely published who it was, but one of the most famous rescues FDNY ever had was it the church that was burning, or was it an office building?
No, it was an office building.
It was an office building where you meat anchored a guy and sent him over the ledge on a rope to pick off somebody that was above the fire. Is that right?
Yeah, I lowered Kevin Shea from Rescue 1. He was 13 stories above ground level, to rescue a trapped civilian from a recording studio. And that was the first time FDNY had used the same rope twice. Technically, you're not allowed to do that under the leadership of Patty Brown, who was a lieutenant at the time, covering in Rescue 1. It was his decision to use the rope again, and because Patty Barr had rescued someone from Side A or Exposure 1, and we had someone on the D or 4 side of the building that we ended up taking care of. And the other thing was the rope was used twice, and the rope was used without tying it off. The FDNY, we had lost 2 firefighters in Harlem. One of them was from where I was a lieutenant in Ladder 28 in a rope rescue, and they fell 7 stories to their death. The rope broke. That was a different rope. So FDNY, after that tragedy, decided that they were going to purchase a new rope, and it would be used exclusively for life-saving, no other purpose. And still to this day, that rope is like a sacred piece of rope. You could use it for something else, but if you did, it would be taken out of service. But it's always brought to the roof by the roof firefighter, and it is sort of our last resort. And in the last year and a half or two, we saw quite a few roof rope rescues. And, they're always dicey. Obviously, anything could happen. Ours was caught on videotape, and it was a very famous thing. And it was probably the highlight of my career without me knowing it. And I had about 10 years on the job at the time. So, but it was very, it was great. It was great for the fire service. A lot of firefighters were inspired by that, future firefighters. And it was just, we had no idea what was going on, the impact of that, which you don't know at the time. You only find out later, but certainly a great moment in the fire service.
I think it's just I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was gonna say it was actually funny because I found that video and I sent it to Will. I'm like, dude, look at this. This is nuts. He goes, yeah, dummy, that's Ray. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know. I had no idea.
Yeah. I just think it's such a highlight of like being proficient, knowledgeable, and then like selfless service. You know what I mean? Like you took the risk to like make the grab, and it like obviously that guy's probably pretty thankful that you did it. You know what I mean? Like pretty good highlight, I would say.
Yeah, and the other thing that was interesting was that FDNY was in a bit of a transition at the time with giving people personal harnesses. Kevin Shea had one, and I had one, but most of the other firefighters on the roof did not. So that was kind of the reason I got involved. I basically Johnny on the spot, so to speak. I came up, Captain, then Lieutenant Brown said to me, he said, "Do you have a harness?" And I said, "Yes." I thought I was going to go over because I had the harness, but Kevin already had one, and they were kind of set up for him to go. They just needed somebody to lower him, and that's where I came into the spot. So it wasn't like I planned anything. It just so happened I had it. I knew how to use it because I had been trained on it. So that was the key to the whole thing at that point. Otherwise, it really would have been a lot more difficult. And then the other thing was that they had changed this whole procedure, and here we are kind of violating it a little bit. So that was Captain Brown's initiative, and you couldn't get a better leader than him.
Yeah, another legend from FDNY. You get when you have a service that gets the quantity and quality of calls that FDNY does, you get to highlight those people. I think it's similar to like the military. There are a lot of like Medal of Honor people in the military that never get that chance. You know what I mean? So you don't know it. But having a service like FDNY, you really get to bring that out of people, and it's pretty awesome, I think, for not only the country but the world that gets to watch you guys. So pretty good.
It's good for culture too.
Great for culture. Great for culture. So you said, Ray, and I think this is kind of going to be the crux of the show here, is that you are happy that Chief Rhodes took over the ship, and you think he's got a good direction for where that's going. And you wanted to talk a little bit about, where the direction of the fire service is going.
Yeah, well, like I alluded to earlier, I believe that a lot of the fire service is driven on two levels. We have our organizations, the International Association of Firefighters, chiefs, all these different organizations, and they do have a very big impact on the fire service. The rank and file firefighter does not have that type of gravitas or reach necessarily, but there is a grassroots campaign in the fire service for departments, companies, individuals to be good at their job and to focus on firefighting. Now, I know there's a lot of fire departments where the majority of calls are medical runs. I understand that. It's gone up astronomically in the FDNY as well. And some departments have never done medical calls. Detroit just started doing medical calls. So, I don't know that we're the answer for medical calls. I really don't think that at all. I think the system is broken. I think we need a new system. Because if your first due company is heavily involved in medical calls, what do you think the second due company is doing? They're pretty much doing the same thing. So where is this fire coverage that we're supposed to have? Busy is not necessarily good. We've always prided ourselves on the numbers of calls. But if the numbers of calls are not panning out to be anything of significance, then your ability to be available when needed is diminished. So that's not necessarily a great thing. It really amounts to, are you there when you're needed? And when you are there, are you being as effective as you can be? That's what I think today's fire service is worried about, the rank and file. And people who lecture, the majority of people who lecture, where they get a lot of their information from and magazines, are concerned about that second half, that when you do show up, are we doing everything we can? Are we efficient as we should be? So while there are obviously bigger issues to worry about in the fire service, and this is typically where the societies and organizations kind of place their thumb on, health issues, health and safety, things like that, mental health, all of that. We need a certain amount of that too, but when you come into the firehouse and you see those fire trucks, that is telling you that our mission is fire. We can certainly help people in their homes every day of the week, and we do. But when a fire breaks out, the ambulance crew is not going to be able to put out the fire. The police department is not going to be able to do it. Only firefighters are able to do that. So we certainly can have EMS. I'm not against EMS in the fire service. What I'm saying is we have to be able to maybe either better diagnose people or charge them a fee if they're not admitted into into the emergency room. We can't make the emergency room and the fire service the taxi service of people. It's just it's not fair to our firefighters. The quality of work when you go to work is important, and there's something to be said. We're beating up firefighters. We're beating up fire apparatus for what? I mean, the vast majority of medical calls are false calls or non-emergency calls. Let's put it that way, non-emergency calls. So we've done something in the fire world with that. New York City used to be plagued with, we have call boxes on the corner where you could press the button and you would get a response from an engine company. And that was just a constantly revolving thing for certain companies, and they had to respond. Well, they came out with some protocols on that and they changed it. So those numbers went down. So change is possible. It's kind of funny that we can give people directions on how to do CPR over the phone, yet we can't ask the right question to find out whether they really do need an ambulance or not.
Right.
So
I think there's a lot to unpack there, but I think there's a few things. One of the things we see a lot is that I should say I hear from people is that, departments will use the ambulance to increase staffing, but then those people are gone half of the day on medical calls. So they're not really increasing the staffing for fires. They're just taking on that role. And the other part of it is I think like people are so afraid of lawsuits. So they're so afraid that if you say, oh, this isn't an emergency, and then the 1 in a billion chance that, something happens and then all of a sudden you're liable for it. How do you think, how do you think this fire service combats those two kind of things, if you have an opinion on it?
Well, I think if the ambulance were to leave with the fire truck on a fire call, then I think then you are getting that additional staffing. If they are not going out on fire calls, then you're certainly never going to get the staffing. Right. The other shame that happens is, and I know someone who's going through this, they join the fire department and they won't see a fire truck for 5 or 6 years because they have to ride the ambulance for the first 5 years. So, I mean, you talk about skills going down. That is just really kind of like unfair. I would prefer to see the burden be shared by all. Like, in other words, every third shift you worked on the ambulance. At least this young firefighter, somebody who's probably in their prime, is going to be unable to do fire duty. That just seems a little silly.
Yeah, you're setting them up to fail.
Yeah.
You're putting them in a bad position. There's a really famous video. It was what's his name? Dr. Handheavy. He talks about a medical where they took the brand new guy on the fire department and they said, drive us to the hospital. It was his first day. And he had no idea where he was. It was a cookie cutter neighborhood. And he drove by the parents of this child that they were doing CPR on. Drove around the neighborhood twice before he was able to get his bearings and get on. And it absolutely destroyed his career. I don't think the kid lasted. He was like devastated because you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they put him in that position.
That's when you're being put into that position. They set him up to fail. Now, hindsight, I'm sure they would change things. They would be like, yeah, that was a bad move. So I'm not being critical of them. But that's what a lot of this.
You could draw a correlation between the firefighter has to do, let's say, 5 years on the ambulance before he can ride in a fire truck, and the pressure to keep it that way comes from the senior firefighters because That's what I had to do. Why should he be able to do something different?
Right.
So it's not only just the administration that may hold a policy longer than it needs to be. It's also going to be supported by firefighters that went through it. It's no different than when new firefighters come to work today versus when they came to work years ago. You can't haze them. Oh, we always did that. Well, you can't do that anymore. So, at some point you have to change the cycle, whether you like it or not. There are some things that your fire department is going to ask you to do that you're not going to like to do. But remember, they sign your check. At some point you just have to say, okay, if there's a reasonable accommodation and you can work towards that, that's fine. But some things you just have to deal with and just change.
Right.
Right.
They want the best for you. They may or may not be going about it the best way, but that's a discussion for after.
Right.
Right.
Ray, did you hear about, there was I think it was in DC. They took a nurse practitioner and they put her at their dispatch center to EMD the calls and to take the calls. And they cut down, the number was so large and significant about the number of transports that they cut down. They might have cut down and DC's obviously a busy place. I think they might have cut down 40% of their transports. Did you ever hear about that?
No, I did not, but that's great information.
That's something to look into. I think you'd be interested to check that out.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah,
so
I think there's telemedicine. We have live chat on the phone. Most people have smartphones. It is possible to get remote diagnosis, not for everything that's wrong with you, but possibly the fact that maybe you could take public transportation or catch a ride. Maybe you don't have to be given immediate attention by this engine company.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Sure.
I mean, the pediatricians' offices do that too. You call in and you talk to a triage nurse, someone who's actually a medical professional, and they say, oh, okay, you can come in, we'll make you an appointment a week from now, or we need to see you today, or you need to go to the emergency room. And those are three very different levels of being sick. Yep. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. I think the waste and abuse of the system is what I don't think anyone is saying that we're not willing to go and help you when you're actually sick or when you actually need help. It's just the routine stuff that doesn't require real assistance gets in the way of being able to do that when you need to be.
Yeah. And I think the fear of the lawsuit is overblown. I'm not saying it couldn't happen. It most certainly could. But letting that hold us back forever from trying something is not the right way to do things.
No.
Right.
I think every single medic on every fire department would agree.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. Board, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Where do you see, Ray, aside from the EMS portion of it, you've obviously been involved with the fire service a long time. Not that long, I'm just saying for your season. Where do you see the differences from when you started to now? I think I asked you, we went to dinner when you were in town, and I had asked you, are the fires harder now or were they harder back then? And you said that they're harder now, or more difficult now. So where do you see the big changes in the fire service from then to now, and the things that we need to combat? Why are the fires harder? What do we need to do to be better?
Well, I mean, each department will change on its own and at its own speed. Changes I saw within my own organization, of course, things seem to get more layered, more chief officers, more directed or focused responsibilities for the command group. And for other organizations, I think some organizations are just getting into standard operating procedures and guidelines where it was just pretty much, we do whatever the chief on scene tells us, or the lieutenant on scene if the first engine is still standing outside and plans to be outside. That type of response, I hope, is changing. I think it is. There's nothing wrong with exterior supervision, but to, at the default of not having interior supervision, I think I'd prefer to have the interior supervision, and the next person on scene can evaluate what they think it looks like, if it's gotten worse or what. Most fires are fairly routine. We have to remember that. Most fires that we go to are fairly routine. I do think it's a little bit more difficult in today's world because there are so many other subject factors that are coming into things, such as health and wellness, cleaning of the gear. I never cleaned my gear for 14 years when I was a firefighter before they instituted, annual or semi-annual cleaning. That doesn't mean that I never cleaned my stuff, but there was no official program for that. And so we have that, and I think we have better command and control, but things have definitely gotten more complicated. And some of that is too much. Granted, there's a point where some of this stuff gets a little silly, but on a whole, I think for the most part, it's good. But I just heard I read a quote from the Mayday survey, which was done by Don Abbott, and it said something to the fact of like a good portion of the Maydays correlated to a lack of a 360. Now, I don't know that, I haven't researched that. That was the stat that was thrown out, something like that. It was a very high number. And I'm not quite sure if everything links together. So let's just say you're working one day as the officer. You're working in a company you never worked in before. You have a new driver that you never worked with before. You have 2 probationary firefighters and 1 senior firefighter. So you have 3 in the back, let's say, and, the driver. Well, that's a good staffing, obviously. But is it ideal situation? No. Most people would rather work with the people they know, or maybe all senior crew, whatever it is. And you know what? You go to a fire and everything works out. Then you read a NIOSH report that points to all those factors, and yet nothing happened. Well, we have the factors in place for negative outcomes all the time. It's not something just random. It's there. And whether that happens in a negative fashion or not is going to hinge on a few things, obviously. And typically it's like a domino. Something happens that, either we're not aware of or we missed it, stuff like that. So when I say it's harder today, you need to be on air when you're in a fire, an IDLH situation. There's no more cheating around, that type of thing. The smoke, a breath or two, and you're going to be down and maybe dead. So strict compliance to the mask policy is important. Improved searches. We're seeing a lot of that with the UL study came out with the search study. That's another great component that built on the extinguishment component that I was part of. And we're seeing advances in that. People are taking that information and developing programs for firefighters. And you know what? All these small conferences, that's where they're getting exposed to stuff like that. Because for a department to take on a change is a big deal. It really is a big deal. They have to vet it. They have to find instructors. They have to find the money, things like that. But a firefighter can go to a conference somewhere, see something that blows them away, bring it back to their colleagues at work and say, what do you think of this? And then they start using it. And then all of a sudden, things start to change a little bit. So I think that's how we're building a lot of change in the fire service at the grassroots level.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Awesome. I think I know, like, again, just speaking for myself, it's when we started doing this, like doing the podcast, is when I really started being exposed more. So when you like expose yourself one place, then another door opens somewhere else and you see something else, and then a door opens somewhere else and you see something else. And it was great, and in a way kind of sad, because I'm like, man, all of these things have been here, for my 12 years, but I'm only learning about a lot of them now. You know what I mean? And so having the right people around you, knowing the right, like you said, having those like grassroots, like people on the line that are into that stuff are very, very helpful.
Yeah, I don't look, if there's a little bit of a lag where you finally, if you want to call it waking up to more than what world you were in already, I don't have a problem with that. Look, I was just going back and forth to work for probably, I don't know, I'll say 7 or 8 years, doing the job I thought I could do. I wanted to be good at it, obviously. But then one day, I'll tell you that little story. One day, something sparked and changed in me, and I flipped the switch a little bit, and I got into it a lot more than I had been. I don't, I would never want a firefighter to go to a conference and go back and look at the people they work with and say, I've lost all respect for these people. They don't always want to drill. No. So they don't always want to drill. So what? I worked with plenty of firefighters that didn't want to drill, but they were phenomenal firefighters. So I don't want to ever equate that with actual results. I think it matters that when you go back and you're psyched up about new information, that you have a little diplomacy as to how you bring it to the forefront. You can't just say, hey, I saw this stuff and we have to change. No, don't do that, because that's going to blow up on you. Have a little bit of a game plan, see where you can weave something in where there might be an opening, then you can get in there. But a lot of firefighters have really hurt themselves with believing that the people, after going to a conference or two, that the people they work with are somehow subpar. And I don't buy that for a minute. I just think that you're on a different level. And to be on that level, you also have to have a respect for the people who aren't on that level. It's okay that they're not on that level. As long as they're competent and they do good, and more than likely, they also have a willingness to learn, just like you did, but maybe just at a different pace. I think that's important to remember. And we're never going to bring everybody along. There's always going to be the caboose. The train always has the last car, and there's always a firefighter in that last car. It's just the way it works.
That was actually some advice that when I left FDIC, one of my lieutenants at work said, he grabbed me and he said, hey, when you go back, he's like, don't expect everybody to basically want to hear about it. He basically told me, like, you're not going to change people. He's like, it's got to be like, I forget how he said it. It's like a slow boil, like frog in the pot. He's like, you can't just go drop the frog in. It's going to jump right out. It's like, don't go back and start talking everyone's face off about everything you learned at FDIC. I'm like,
Right.
Yeah. But it was advice.
It's hard because you get so passionate, right? That you're like, you want to, like, oh, I saw these things, like you want to share it, and then you realize, like, coming off a little strong, so I gotta reel it in,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Certainly happens to me, unfortunately, but
happens. It happens to everyone. It happens to everyone, and all of us who've attended something like FDIC have fallen into that trap. I was with a fellow years ago, and he says, "Oh, I love that standpipe folder." I said, "Oh, okay." I said, "Do me a favor." I said, "When you go back, do not tell them that you got it from the FDNY. That will kill it right there. Just tell them you saw it. Tell them you made it up yourself. It doesn't matter, but don't do that, because the brakes will be on." And yet, while I say that, and that does happen a lot, I've also seen in recent years where things that FDNY has done for years have become very popular, such as bringing the extinguisher in with you, the can on a search, flat laid hose, a large hose bed in the rear, just stuff like that. Vent enter search, which we've done forever. So, it's just funny how some of the things people rebuffed as being from FDNY are now standards that are being taught to firefighters, which is good.
That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always good. What's what are you working on now, Ray? Like, what are you doing? Obviously, you just did all the FDIC, reading all the proposals and stuff like that. I saw actually, it must have been a few weeks ago. You were with our buddy Dave Quick doing some hose stuff.
Yeah, that was from FDIC. That's right. Mm-hmm. That was from FDIC.
Oh, that was FDIC. God, I felt like I saw that like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, no, it was, but yeah, you only just recently saw it. It was a photo we put up. But yeah, Dave and I are probably going to work together in the future a little bit, and I'll explain that. I just took an advisory role with HEN Nozzles, which stands for High Efficiency Nozzles, and they are a new company out of California, and we are making nozzles, and they are made in the U.S. and assembled in the U.S., and they are beautiful pieces of work. They cover the range from forestry, 20 gallons a minute, 45 a minute. We have all different sizes. 95 at 100 PSI nozzle for, it's a great trash line, car fire line. A WUI line, if you're familiar with WUI, which is the Wildland Urban Interface. Yeah. They gave it a name, WUI. So they like that one. And then, of course, 7/8, which is the most popular flow diameter in the United States. 15/16, inch and an eighth is all the different sizes. And what's interesting about the HEN nozzle is that it is a smoothbore nozzle that you can adjust into a wide, what we're referring to, a blade stream, basically a flat stream, and then you can make it wider. I can do the Vulcan thing, no problem, as you can see. You can make it wider or, narrow, whatever you want. And it's a flat stream. And what it does is, this is what it's going to do for the American Fire Service. It's going to do a couple things for training. It's going to allow nozzle firefighters to work a little less vigorously on extinguishment and coverage. Because if you set it in the blade mode, you're going to get a wide band of coverage with nice, very big droplets, not a fog stream, very big droplets. And the movement of side to side, or if you want to set the nozzle vertically for a vertical wall of water, you can do that as well. Then it would be a side to side motion. That's up to the nozzle firefighter. But what's happening is you have to move the nozzle very gently to get that coverage. So this form of whipping around to get the air entrainment value up a little higher, the nozzle will automatically do that for you. Because it's a wide band of water, it will entrain more air, but the level of air entrainment is not dangerous. It's good. We want the air to come in behind the nozzle team. The other thing that is interesting is that something we haven't looked at, and I'm starting to write about it, but I am discussing it with people, is if we think of a smoothbore stream or a straight stream out of a fog, we basically have a pole going up into the upper atmosphere and connecting with the ceiling. And in the American Fire Service, we use, to our advantage, surface cooling. The Europeans use strictly gas cooling. I was fortunate enough to go to England last year, and we did some testing and comparison things with their nozzles and our nozzles in the containers that they provided at the their fire academy in Great Britain. And so gas cooling is strictly just the gases. They don't want that water touching surfaces. In the American Fire Service, we use surface cooling, and it works to a great advantage. It really is a great thing. And even UL, has talked about the surface cooling and flowing the water. So we want to flow decent water, and we'll do that. The missing component, I think, is gas contraction. Now, we do get gas contraction. We do get that when we hit the ceiling surface and the walls. We do get that. But where we were missing it was in the initial exit of the stream to the ceiling target. And we recently did a live burn with the HEN nozzle in a very large open area. I would say the ceilings were probably 12 feet tall. Room was probably 15 wide by 30 deep. And that was just basically an open area that was getting fire from the fire room. Anyway, As soon as they opened that nozzle and it went up to the ceiling, our photographer felt instant relief. And he had been in there from the get-go. He didn't just come in with the nozzle team. He had been sitting there waiting and filming. And he said he couldn't believe the relief that came out like almost instantaneously. And that's where I started to really think about this gas cooling, because imagine, like I said, you have either straight stream or smooth bore going up towards the ceiling. That's your narrow pipe going up there. And it's cooling a certain amount of gases that interact with that narrow diameter of water. But when you have a jet that's wide and gets wider as it goes up, that's interacting with the gas layer before it even hits the surface. So we're getting tremendous gas cooling just prior to surface cooling and additional gas contraction and cooling as well. So I think, and then droplet retention is big. In fog streams, droplet sizes are very small typically. This is very chunky water. You know, when you do when you want to hydraulically ventilate a room, you want to clear the smoke out. Another thing is what is well behind the nozzle firefighter, tasking that to the nozzle firefighter, because it can be done right away. As soon as you get that room knocked down, you can, measure your stream for the window opening. Well, when you take the tip off a nozzle, typically that's what you do, and you bring it back maybe a third to halfway until you hear that really loud noise of the water being agitated. And those streams are very chunky. That water is big droplets. The only problem is you're trying to fit a round object in a square hole. Where does most of the water end up? On the walls a lot of times. Or you have to get super close to use this. Well, with the hen nozzle, we're actually putting a square stream through a square hole. Because, the funny thing about it, if you've never seen it, when you look at the where the water exits from, it exits out of a rectangle. It doesn't exit out of a circle.
Right.
So the stream has a rectangular shape to begin with, and when you're doing the hydraulic ventilation, we were 12, 13 feet away from the window. Distance is important. And we got that stream to fit into that narrow opening, and we were shooting a full 160 gallons a minute, not half bale 70 to 80. So tremendous value in that as well. So we have the smoothbore stream that's just as hard as any other smoothbore stream, and then no change in gallonage when you open it up wide. Tremendous coverage, tremendous cooling. Basically, you're going to put it up, you're going to pull it down. Maybe you do that twice, and you're going to have great coverage of that room. So it's really fascinating.
Is this similar to you'd show me old photos back when you were on the engine company, and you took a 7/8 tip and you just squished it?
Yes. So that would represent a narrow blade. So if you were to bring the blade setting to like halfway, that's that stream that you would get. And this allows you to go a little further than that to something that's even wider. But yep, that's exactly right. So probably at least 10 years ago, I had come up with this idea to crush a circular tip into an oval, and it produced a great stream. And then 10 years later, I run into hen nozzles at a trade show, and I'm instantly fascinated because I'm seeing what I thought of as an actual potential product. So I was very excited about it. And then after talking with them and being able to advise them on nozzle design and things like that, it's just been great. It's been a great opportunity, for me.
Yeah. I hear a lot, because we have I'm obviously not as well versed, but we have people that can nerd out, like Dave Quick's one of them, on nozzles and hoses and pressures and PSI and gallonage and everything. And I hear a lot when people talk about that. You hear from guys like, "Oh, I don't know, why do I need to know all that science? We pull it off the truck and it works." And I'm always in my head, I'm like, well, the reason it works is because these guys took the time to like develop and research and think about all of those like minutia of details, so that when you just pull it off the truck, you have something that's going to be effective. And I think it's really cool that there are guys out there doing that, because it obviously makes it better for us on the as the end user,
Yeah, no, every department needs somebody who's super into a topic, because that helps with the guidance on when you pick your hose or your nozzles or some whatever tool it might be. You do need your in-house expertise to come to fruition because years ago everything was friction loss. If you had a low friction loss number, that was great. Well, it turned out that really wasn't such a great thing to base hoses on. So I can remember Dennis having dinner with Dennis and out in California with a few other people, and he talked about the hose idea, the fact that the hoses were getting wider and wider. Yes, less friction loss, but at a cost, and and we all know where that went into True ID hose, more realistic diameter, and it's been a great thing for the fire service. So. Dennis is also involved in hen nozzles with me. So he and I together. So it's great.
So we actually got. So I put out to ask some questions, and this just is an appropriate time for this. So one of the questions was, what do you think about 2-inch hose line and their place in the engine company's arsenal today? And then they specifically asked if you had any experience with the Kraken Super 2-inch.
Yes. FDNY uses Mercedes 2-inch as the lead length for the standpipe stretch. So it's filled out by also Mercedes 2.5, and then it's brought down to 2-inch. I don't have a problem with 2-inch. I think it's a versatile hose line. I wouldn't be a big fan of having it on the back step if I had 1 3/4, 2-inch, 2.5. I don't think you need that. And I think the problem with having 3 lines that are close like that is your default will become the 2-inch because officers or firefighters, whoever gets that choice to pick, will be worried that maybe the 1 3/4 isn't enough, and they'll go to 2-inch, and then maybe they are resistant on pulling the 2.5, so they default to the 2-inch. So I think while it serves a purpose, and it's up to people. Some people would just as soon have the 2-inch instead of anything else. And
we
not
have
an
a department around here that runs 2-inch.
Not an 1 3/4, not a 2.5, and I don't have a problem with that. My problem only is when it becomes the middle. It's small, medium, or large, and just like, you know what? I don't know how big the large cup is. The small cup's probably too small. Just give me the medium one. And I think at times that'll be a little too much and maybe not enough. So otherwise, I think it's fine. It has a hand feel like 1 3/4, so it's almost automatically accepted as okay by firefighters when they first touch it. There's not enough attention paid to that hand feel. We went to a convention years ago, and a guy gave us a titanium Halligan to, here, try it out. What do you think? And it was instantly negative. It just didn't feel right. And I think 2-inch is a great compromise for getting out of 2.5. And standpipe, one of the things with standpipe we have to get through our heads is that very few people are going to large office building standpipe fires. They happen. They do occur. Granted, they do occur. But this over reliance in the belief that we have to have 2.5 off systems is not necessarily true, and it's not backed up by NFPA 14 either. Basically, when they said 100 PSI at the outlet years ago after One Meridian Plaza fire in Philadelphia, they made that change, and they basically green-lighted smaller handline usage with that raise in pressure. And for a lot of people that are just getting into standpipe buildings, I won't even call it high-rise, standpipe buildings, they're going to follow that post-93 code. So I'm not saying use 1 3/4, because if you have to go a long distance, and a lot of times people are, the outlets, because they allowed sprinklers, the outlets are fairly distant. You probably should go to a larger hose just to cut down on that friction loss a little bit. And the 2-inch is a wonderful hose for that, certainly. And in its own right, as a decent standpipe line, because you can certainly have a decent flow. I don't know that 265 versus like 230 is that big of a deal. We don't give enough credence to placement. If you could have 300 gallons a minute, if you're putting it in the wrong spot, it's not doing anything. So
right.
Placement is a big component, especially in the residential compartment space, which is where 95% or more of our fires are: homes, apartments, and high-rise buildings.
Right.
High-rise residential is where our fires mostly are. And stream placement and dispersal is very important. That's I'll go back to the pattern again. That's one of the things about the blade pattern that just makes it easy. Think about it. If I can wet a 4 or 5 or 6 foot space directly versus a 3 or 8 inch wide space, which is easier to do?
Yeah.
Obviously, the wider one, So,
right.
If you have to sweep up a large space, do you really want a narrow broom or a wide broom? So it explains itself.
When you say it, when you say it like that, it's almost like, well, Jesus, why is it taking this long to start thinking about those things? You know what I mean?
Well, we might be at the beginning of, I hope, something that is a revolutionary change in the fire service. This started out as a concept for the forestry industry because it makes total sense for them. They put down like a 4-foot wide pattern to wet the grass and things like that. And then they also need to extend the stream to shoot at a distance. So they get both. And they're used to using a fog stream, an adjustable fog. So having this stream the way they want it already makes perfect sense. In fact, we have photographs of forestry firefighters putting leather behind their nozzle. The leather is used to push in front of the stream to get it to fan out. So they were making their own adaptations of this idea already. So for the forestry service, when they see it, they say, yeah, all right, this makes perfect sense. The fire service is gotten into smoothbore nozzles, which is great. Some places use a fog nozzle. That's wonderful too. But now we have something that gives you the smoothbore. You already have that. That box is checked. You have the smoothbore, but we have something else as well on that. And that's up to you to decide if you want to use it. And we think by using that in a residential compartment, you're going to get very good results.
That's awesome.
We had I won't give his name out because I want him he can do his own thing when he gets out, but he tried to set the nozzle up in a container fire, and he gave it a really good container fire, and he basically said instead of that the nozzle killed it, it murdered it. That was his quote. It murdered the fire. So I won't say who it was, but he's held in high regard in the American Fire Service, and he's a buddy, and I'll let him speak to that in the future, but yeah, so
maybe you have to give us his name off air so we can give him a buzz.
Maybe.
Hey, so while we're on nozzles a little bit, one of the lieutenants that I work with, a good friend of mine, I asked him to come up with some questions for you. He also came to your lecture out at FDIC. But a good friend of mine, Ryan Cabral, he has a lot of questions for you. He gave me a list of like 20 questions, but while we're on the nozzles, and I know you've answered this question before, but we'll have you answer it again. So he wants your opinion on 7/8 versus 15/16.
Yeah, 7/8 I think is probably the way to go for most fire departments. 7/8. The big thing with I don't have the exact number, but I think it's 59. 59 pounds of nozzle reaction with the 7/8 flowing 160 gallons a minute. So one thing it's important for fire departments to make sure that they're flowing what they think they're flowing or should be flowing, because to have a hot hand line is not helpful.
Right.
When I taught at the fire academy, I did a simple stretch, 4 lengths, and we would just do a mock evolution, but flow, try and flow and move the whole time. Because to me, that's a skill set that you may need. You don't always need it, but you may need it. And if I just said, okay, open up the line, shoot it, and crawl forward, what kind of a thing is that? It's not much, really. So to make it a little bit more challenging, we would do that. But one thing I did do that I never saw anybody else do is I used a pitot gauge to judge how much water what was our nozzle flowing at. And sometimes it'd be very hot. Now, for me to evaluate company A from company B or firefighters within the company, you don't want that. You want everything set just at the right amount so that when engine 1 here does a tremendous job and engine 2 comes the next day, but they had a hot nozzle and I didn't realize it. And their firefighters are underperforming. That's not fair to them. So if you're in the teaching world and we try and pitot the line so that we know exactly where it's at, everybody gets a fair shot at it. But 7/8, I think one of the key things about firefighters having issues is nozzle reaction. The 15/16, it can be very temperamental and the nozzle reaction is higher. And, it's just a more difficult line and it's probably not, in most situations, it's probably not worth the extra gallonage.
Right.
You have to remember too, like nozzle reaction, nobody really talks about this, but nozzle reaction is direct. In other words, it's in line. But once I move the line off to an angle, let's say, and I still have it along my right-hand side here, but I move it to the left, that nozzle reaction has increased. That's not the same nozzle reaction as when I had it straight forward. It's increased quite a bit. Right. And depending on how extreme I am with that angle, then I'm really going to get a workout with this line. So nozzle reaction is registered for that perfect, symmetrical, straight back and forth. But when you bring it off to the side, there's some other factors that come into play. So I think 7/8 is a good hand line, and most conferences are taught under that number as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Is there anything else you wanted to hit on before? I know we had a couple of questions, so I'd love to get some of the questions that are in here. But is there anything else that you want to talk about? We talk about the future of the fire service and where you think it's headed, and do you think we're headed to a good place?
Yes, I do. I do think we're headed to a good place. I think there's going to be some bumps in the road, of course. There's always that. But yes, I do think we're headed to a good place. We're getting a little more knowledge out there. It takes a while. It does take a while for things to get around, believe it or not. Even in an internet world, it does take a while. But the American Fire Service has listened to the research, I believe. I don't know about our European counterparts as much. They have their own fight with our methods, which is fine. They have their way and we have ours. That's perfectly fine. But the American Fire Service is listening. One of the things, it depends on how information is given out initially. There was a whole thing about you couldn't push fire. You couldn't push fire. This went on for several years. And then finally, UL came out with a video by Dan Majkowski explaining how fire can be moved around or pushed. And because we had plenty of firefighters who had lived through that type of experience. And it kept saying, no, that's not really what happened. Well, whether that really happened or not, it happened. So anyway, that was finally covered, but we lost a lot of ground on that. Flow path is another thing we lost a lot of ground and a lot of wasted time on. So what I tell firefighters is I may or may not use the term flow path, but you have to measure the energy that smoke has. So how is that smoke coming out when you open that door? Is it, lazy? Is it coming at you like a freight train? Is it hot? Is it turbulent? That's the stuff you really need to look at. Like, I'm going to be crawling through this, under it, around it, whatever. What is the energy rate of that smoke that's coming at you? That's going to determine whether you need to open up right away or get in a little further and then open up. Finding the sweet spot for opening up is going to be an issue for most firefighters, I think. But what we don't want firefighters to do is make the journey there without flowing any water on the interior, because that you're not necessarily doing yourself any favor there. And once your gear gets saturated, You'll push your own mother out of the way to get out of there. So you don't ever want to be the driver of the line, the nozzle firefighter, and think that, hey, it's always best to just go down there dry. It's not. We have to create a cocoon of safety for ourselves and bring that water to bear against that flow path that's coming towards us, reverse the energy flow back towards the fire room and out the window, and then just move in and put that fire out. Because remember, the red zone, we'll call the room the red zone. The red zone extends outside of that room into the hallway, and it could extend all the way to the front door. Anything's possible. But so you have to be aware of that and then use your nozzle accordingly. I believe the approach is worth 30 to 40 gallons, whatever it is you flow. Imagine a fish tank. You're going to dump a fish tank in that house. That's all you're doing. And you're going to make sure you get to that fire room safely. I don't think that's a big operational cost at all, because you are unaware of the temperatures of the products near you. Is the couch ready to light off? You're not exactly sure. You could get past that couch and it could light off behind you. I'm not saying you wet everything like a crazy person, but you also have to be aware of the fact that these things are off-gassing and getting towards their ignition temperatures. So you have to be real careful with that.
That's awesome.
Awesome. So we'll do one more question, Ray. I know we promised we'd keep you around the hour mark and not the 4 hour mark like our European counterparts did. And
it was in English.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah, right. Translator, it would have been an 8 hour episode. So one of the guys wants to know, and this is kind of just a personal question for you. Obviously, you came up through from being a firefighter to an engine boss. He wants to know what kind of extra steps you took becoming an officer in the engine after spending your time as a firefighter in the truck. And what advice would you give to members getting promoted from a truck and going to an engine, or vice versa?
Well, yeah. All right. So that is a very important question. And I made that transition between a ladder company firefighter and an engine officer. So as an officer in the FDNY, you work in either ladder companies or engine companies. And of course, there are more engine companies. So the fact of the matter is, more than likely, you're going to work in an engine a good portion of your, at least till you get a permanent assignment. So anyway, I had the opportunity to be asked by Captain Patrick Brown. He was 69 engine captain at the time. And if you remember, he was the same person on the roof rope rescue with me, if I wanted to come to 69 engine. And I was like, oh my God, yeah, I'd love to come there. Now, I was pretty green. I was very green. I had 13 years of experience, but not as an engine boss, not in the engine. So I was fortunate enough to have a crew that had a good balance of senior firefighters, and we were getting in probies as well. But we also had a nice area where we could practice. We had some vacant buildings we could practice in. So I would always go out and practice, and the practice was for me as well. And I would allow the firefighters pretty much to do whatever they wanted to do. And I would ask them to do certain things that maybe, I remember one time, one of the firefighters, I told him to lay down on the floor and operate the line and try and advance that way. And one guy said, well, if it's so hot, why are we in here? And I said, well, maybe we shouldn't be in here, but we're in here. Now that we are in here, how do we defend ourselves? Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter how you get to something. It matters how you operate in it. So another thing that happened to me, we had a situation where fire broke out behind us. We were going down the hallway to the fire room, and I was the last one. I was behind the nozzle team, and fire broke out of the kitchen behind me. And of course, we had the door open, so it went right towards the hall. So we were caught between going to this fire, and we had fire behind us. So it wasn't pretty, but we got our way out of it and regrouped in the hallway and then put out the fire. But after that fire, I said, I got to figure out a way to deal with this the right way. So basically, I came up with this idea that, the nozzle firefighter turns towards the hose line. And when you do that, you can hit the fire that's in front of you if it's visible. And then the line is bent in the direction of where the fire is, which is behind you. So it requires a 0 turn radius because you just bend it back on itself, and that is a wonderful technique to use for a lot of different things. And but I worked on it. I cared enough to work on it. That's a big deal. If you care about yourself, then you'll work on yourself to get better and get the knowledge, whether it's through reading, discussions with other experienced officers or firefighters. Like I said, I was blessed with some senior firefighters that tolerated my ignorance, so to speak. They were willing to let me do, whatever, because they realized that I needed that, and the firefighters needed it as well, especially the new ones. I had a lot of experienced firefighters that I worked with. So one of the things we would try and do is we would put the nozzle firefighter in the nozzle position day one. I would also try and see their skill set before they had that fire. And hopefully I don't think anybody got there at 6 o'clock and went to a fire at 6:01. But I always wanted to see their skill set before we went anywhere so that it could be critiqued at least in-house. But we kept that nozzle firefighter on the nozzle until they caught their first fire, and then they would be moved into the rotation. And then another thing we did, we always put a more experienced firefighter behind them, just in case, because it is the officer's call. As rude as that may sound, it could be that you could go to a fire where the brand new firefighter is probably not the best choice for a fire attack. And yet, sometimes they surprise you. Sometimes they're just simply amazing. But, as a boss, you do have final call. I'll just tell you another little story. So I used to let them work out their riding list. It was a thing we allowed the firefighters to do. It was a nice little perk. They run the firehouse. They take care of everything there. So as a little bit of a perk, they were allowed to figure out who's going to be in what position. And as long as that worked and nobody was getting like constantly the same position, I didn't have a problem with it. I would always kind of monitor it in the back of my head to make sure it was equitable and fair. And one night I stepped in and said, you know what, I really don't like this lineup. And I asked a guy you're probably familiar with, Tim Klett, to change his position. And he went into the backup slot. The nozzle firefighter had a mask issue, and we were at a third alarm. And Timmy and I and the rest of the crew, we had fire in 3 apartments on 3 different floors. The chief says to us, he says, Ray, you want to get up to the top floor. The fire's blowing out the peephole. Peephole, somebody looks there was a stream of fire about 1 foot long coming out of the peephole. And yeah, he was right. We did want to be there. And so we ended up getting a unit citation that night. And it was the only time I ever did it. But sometimes you have like a premonition in your head. You can't figure it out. You act under some reason in the back of your head, and it worked out great.
Wow, that's awesome. That's a good story.
One more quick question, Ray. I'd like you to answer. What would you if you were to give yourself advice, your 20-year-old self as advice? I'm sorry, your 20-year-old self advice. Can you depart some of that wisdom on us?
Well, what I tell new firefighters, and it's not even for new firefighters, it's anybody really. Try and learn what's in those compartments and what's on that apparatus. That is the key. Knowing your tools and the capability of those tools. One of the things that you'll see sometimes is we had them in New York. They still have them. Is a 2-piece portable stang, and it has to be tied off, and the knots are just like, people don't remember these things, and it's the perfect setup for a company embarrassment issue. Let's just say you're at this big fire, the press is there, and here's a company kind of scratching their head. So the tools you don't see that often, you better know them as well. Like the foamy ductor, you have to know what are the parameters they're using, something like that. Know that stuff, and pretty much the rest will kind of fall in line because you're using those on a daily basis. But know your equipment, obviously, because then nobody can ever take that away from you. You know the equipment, you know its capability. So you have to drill on stuff. You can't just talk stuff up. You have to take it out, use it, maintain it, things like that. The other thing I would say is make your day about the fire department while you're there. Now, you're going to have time off to relax and read a book or whatever it is you want to do. But when you come into work, make it about work. You can have your coffee and, all that stuff. Nobody's restricting you from having a nice social time while you're there or anything like that. But focus on the job. Focus on maybe where the job could be. Keep that in your head for something in the future you might want to do or be asked to do. When I got the nod for the engine book, I had talked to another chief you've probably heard of, Frank Lieb, about, how could we fix the book? How could we do this? Blah, 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 back and forth. And he finally just said, well, why don't you rewrite it? And I was like, I'd be happy to rewrite it. Thank you. So, he knew my interest in the topic and they were looking to get it done. It hadn't been done for over 20 years. Mm-hmm. Granted, there were changes made. It is a living document. Even to this day, changes are made. But we revamped the whole thing and, it worked out great. It was basically the capstone to my career, and it was just wonderful experience. And, I'm proud of it because it's very readable. It makes for good reading, which is hard to believe a manual could make for good reading, but it does. And, our team worked on it, and, it was great. And so make the day about the job, whatever it is, XYZ Fire Department. Make it about that and do a little extra. Extra. Like, I know what I meant to say. So, like, I probably had 7 or 8 years on a job, and it's a very simple story. A buddy of mine came back and said, wow, you should see the compartments on that ladder truck. They're unbelievable. Now, back in those days, there was a shelf maybe in a compartment. There was no, like, specialized tool storage or anything to hold things in place. So I asked the captain if I could redo our forcible entry tool compartment, which was on a Seagrave, and it traversed from both sides. And when you pulled one thing out, you'd get 3 on the floor. So, it was a mess. And it was a mess. It just was. So he let me do it. I put some plywood in there, created a couple of shelves, put the, so now instead of 3 things falling on the floor, maybe we could just pull one out and the rest would stay there. So this is before, like tubes and all these things. Sure. And then I just went all the way around the fire truck. I did all the compartments. I did all of them. Sometimes I got some support. Sometimes I didn't. But I had the permission to do it, and it worked out better for everyone. And that's kind of where I flipped the switch. And then, I had some great mentors. Chief Vinny Dunn was a deputy in my house. So I always liked to write. And then he kind of spotted my first article. And, I went from there and I tried it, because I liked it. I don't think you can't force yourself into certain things. I don't want to do everything in the fire service, and that, finding, things you're interested in is where you'll get the most enjoyment, So when you stick to those parameters, you do fine.
Right.
I love it, man.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I love that. So make your day about work. And I wrote down one of the other things you said, and I really like it. And it's it doesn't matter how you get into a situation, it matters how you operate in it. And that's on the fire floor, in the firehouse, whatever department you're on, whatever staffing they do. It doesn't matter how you get there. Figure out a way to work in it. I love that. So
maybe I can use that as a quote too.
Throw that in the book.
I think you ought to do that.
Yeah.
So thanks, Ray, for coming on. Really appreciate it. As always, it's good to chat with you and have a little bit of that wisdom that's hanging around that brain imparted on us. So we really appreciate you coming on. Hopefully not the last time we get to see and talk to you on the show, but really appreciate you being here. And you have anything else you want to impart on your way out?
No, people that are involved in the fire service are fortunate people. They really are. Not only do they get time off during the week and get to work holidays,
Right.
No, it's great. The ability to, and this is just a little thing, to knock on any firehouse door in this country and be accepted is pretty phenomenal when you think about it, because they automatically know you're them. You're them. and
Right.
you know, we treat people well too. I believe that the citizens get probably the best service they get out of any municipal department. Granted, they don't have daily interaction with us, but they have respect for us for a reason, because we deliver.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. I'm with you on that one.
100%, man. I saw one. I don't remember who it was that said, "We're the best form of government there is. We show up, we fix your problem, and then we leave, and that's it."
That's it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we do.
All right, so with that, we'll leave you guys. Make sure you tune in next week for another episode. Again, Ray, just want to say thanks for coming. Really appreciate it, and thanks for taking some of the questions that guys had. Guys, don't forget to make your day about the fire department, and we will see you guys the next time. Johnny?
All right. JobTlks out.